The scene shifted to Poolin, a quiet, rural region where pigs and cows outnumbered people. The area was known for farming, isolated mountain villages, and peaceful countryside life. Among those remote places was the village of Torin, a slowly aging settlement where almost nothing exciting ever happened. Because of that, the entire village became unusually lively when a celebration suddenly took place. The reason behind the excitement was the return of the village's greatest pride. 3 days earlier, Janica had finally come home. Holding a half-eaten loaf of bread in her hand, Janica stared absent-mindedly into the distance while lost in thought. Her mind wandered toward Ed, and she quietly wondered whether he had been doing well lately. Before she could sink deeper into those thoughts, her father's voice suddenly interrupted her and startled her out of her daze. He noticed how troubled she looked, and assumed she was upset because she was no longer ranked first in her class. In his eyes, second place was still an incredible achievement, so he tried reassuring her. Janica quickly denied it. Although she admitted she felt slightly disappointed about her grades, she insisted that it was nothing serious enough to make her depressed. After answering, she let out a small sigh. Her father immediately became suspicious for a completely different reason. If it was not about school rankings, then perhaps there was a boy occupying her thoughts. The suggestion instantly made Janica panic. Embarrassed beyond belief, she jumped up and loudly denied everything. She became flustered, insisting that her father was making strange assumptions and exaggerating things as if she spent all day thinking about some boy. Trying to hide her embarrassment, she grabbed at her messy hair and desperately attempted to explain herself. She complained that her father always said ridiculous things whenever he had free time. Then, using feeding the cows as an excuse, she hurriedly tried to escape the conversation, claiming she had already planned to do it anyway. She begged him not to ask such strange questions out of nowhere because they startled her. Janica's parents silently exchanged glances. Excitement slowly spread across their faces as their imaginations began running wild. The thought of their daughter being involved with someone from Sylvania Academy completely thrilled them. Her father became especially enthusiastic. He imagined finally having a son-in-law who could shoot arrows beside him while they drank together. At the same time, he realized the boy might still be too young for alcohol, but the fantasy alone already made him happy. Meanwhile, Janica's mother became equally invested. She began wondering what kind of person the boy was, and whether his family would approve of them. Her thoughts quickly drifted toward appearances, manners, and even old wedding clothes. She considered altering her old dress and anxiously asked for the boy's name. Janica became completely overwhelmed. Stepping backward awkwardly, she stuttered and tried denying everything again. She insisted her parents had misunderstood the situation and questioned why she would ever tell them anything like that. Her denial only made things worse. Her parents dramatically collapsed into despair as if performing a rehearsed tragedy. They spoke like heartbroken parents preparing themselves for the inevitable loneliness of old age. They imagined Janica someday locking herself away in her room while they stood outside helplessly, abandoned in their elderly years. Janica stared at them in disbelief, completely confused by how far their imagination had gone. Her parents then looked at her with sparkling eyes, clearly waiting for confirmation. Unable to handle the pressure anymore, Janica finally gave the simplest answer possible. She admitted that the boy was very good at archery. That single statement was enough to ignite the entire village. Only a few hours later, Janica found herself surrounded by excited neighbors who had somehow already heard the rumors. Everyone enthusiastically praised her. Some promised to open treasured bottles of liquor that had been saved for decades, while others talked about roasting an entire pig to celebrate. Because the mysterious boy supposedly came from Sylvania, many villagers assumed he had to be wealthy or even some kind of young noble. To them, Janica had become the pride of the entire town. The non-stop cheering and attention left her completely frozen. Hearing her name repeated over and over again only made her feel more exhausted. Internally, she reached her limit and began thinking that she could no longer survive in the village like this. More than anything, she wanted to return to Akan Island immediately. The scene then shifted to the northern forest of Aeon Island beneath the glow of moonlight. Marilda quietly walked across the water while reminiscing about the past. She admitted that lately she had been feeling strangely melancholic. The recent destruction of the Rotire family had triggered those emotions. Ed, who leaned calmly against a nearby tree, objected slightly to her wording. He did not consider it simple destruction. To Marilda, however, the Rotire family had once been a prestigious bloodline with a long history. Seeing powerful clans and ancient forces disappear one after another constantly reminded her how much time had passed. That realization weighed heavily on her. She confessed that sometimes it felt as though the world itself was slowly leaving her behind. Perhaps it was because she had already passed the peak years of her life as a spirit, but those thoughts often returned to haunt her. Hearing such unusually emotional words from Marilda surprised Ed. He worried for a moment about her lifespan, but she reassured him that she still had at least another 100 years remaining. With a faint smile, she teased him slightly, wondering whether he feared losing her. Ed admitted that he was more confused about why she suddenly seemed so sad. Marilda eventually revealed the true reason. The purple-haired girl who had recently appeared in the forest reminded her of someone from the past. The great sage of Sylvania had once been an eccentric scholar who cared about research above all else, no matter the situation. Watching that girl awakened memories of those old days. Because of those feelings, Marilda had wanted to keep observing her, though she realized that doing so had unintentionally dragged Ed into trouble. Ed brushed it off casually, pointing out that everything had already been resolved thanks to Tracyana. Still, after thinking about it more carefully, he admitted the girl was not actually that similar to the great sage after all. Marilda clarified that she was not referring to appearance or status. Instead, she confessed that she had recently found someone else who reminded her of the great sage far more strongly. That person was Ed himself. She explained that his refusal to give up no matter the situation, along with the natural way he interacted with her, reminded her deeply of the person from long ago. Ed quietly reflected on those words. Even without checking any status window, he could feel how much closer he had become to Marilda after fighting beside her through dangerous situations. In the game world, increasing intimacy with high-ranking spirits strengthened spirit-related abilities and improved skill effectiveness. Sometimes it could even unlock entirely new events. As he finished thinking about that, Marilda suddenly revealed something shocking. She possessed the remains of the highest-ranked wind spirit and was willing to give them to him. The revelation stunned Ed. The highest-level spirits were legendary beings believed to exist as only one entity for each element. According to magical history books, the supreme wind spirit had already died of old age long ago. If Ed could truly access those remains, his spirit abilities would improve dramatically. Marilda explained that the remains were not exactly a corpse. Instead, they were more like spiritual remnants left behind after the spirit faded away. Ed became suspicious and questioned why she had suddenly changed her mind about giving him something so valuable. Marilda bent down slightly in front of him and honestly admitted that trustworthy companions were difficult to find. Although Janica was also precious to her, Janica was not the kind of person with whom she could openly share her deeper thoughts. However, Marilda made one thing clear: nothing came for free. The story then moved to the harbor of Aeon Island, where students were busily returning to the academy. Rich and Elka arrived carrying large amounts of luggage after an exhausting boat ride. Elka especially looked drained from seasickness, leading Rich to suggest that they should take a carriage next time, even if traveling by ship was technically faster. While talking, they suddenly noticed someone familiar nearby. Janica was dragging an enormous suitcase behind her as she returned to the island much earlier than expected. Rich found this strange because Janica normally stayed home as long as possible to help her family before returning to school. Curious, he asked why she had come back so early this time. Janica awkwardly searched for an excuse. The real reason, of course, was that she could no longer endure the endless praise and gossip back in her village. Eventually, she avoided giving a direct answer and simply brushed the topic aside. Rich then bluntly asked whether things between her and Ed were not going well. The question caught Janica off guard. Elka immediately scolded Rich for being insensitive, but Janica unexpectedly admitted that she and Ed had recently experienced some tension. She worried that she might actually be a burden to him. Ever since the incident during the exam, she had felt guilty and wanted to make things right. She had even suggested traveling together to Pullen, yet Ed chose to return to Akan Island alone instead. Janica began overthinking everything. She wondered whether staying with him at the campsite had secretly annoyed him while he merely hid those feelings. Rich listened carefully before explaining that he honestly did not think she needed to worry so much. According to him, boys usually showed clear signs whenever they truly wanted distance from someone. Later that evening, as the sun disappeared behind the clouds, Janica finally returned to the familiar forest. She greeted Ed cheerfully and mentioned that she had come back earlier than expected. Ed responded while turning his face slightly away from her. He casually commented on her early arrival. At that exact moment, Rich's earlier explanation echoed in Janica's mind. The first sign was avoiding eye contact. Trying to remain calm, she moved closer and gently asked whether he had been feeling better lately. Ed replied briefly and shortly. The second sign was giving cold answers that killed conversations. Then Janica noticed his visibly uncomfortable and tense behavior around her. That completed all 3 signs Rich had mentioned. The realization struck her hard. She began wondering if she truly had become a burden to Ed. Just as the atmosphere became unbearably awkward, Ed suddenly spoke up and broke the silence. He told Janica that there was something important he wanted to discuss. Confused but nervous, Janica asked what it was. Ed struggled awkwardly to explain. He warned her that the topic might sound strange and that he had his own reasons for bringing it up. Depending on the situation, the request could become extremely uncomfortable. As silence filled the forest, only the sounds of birds and the crackling campfire remained. In the end, Ed almost gave up trying to say it. But Janica immediately sat beside him and insisted she was ready to hear anything. No matter how difficult or unpleasant the matter was, she promised that she would stand by his side. At that moment, Ed remembered his earlier conversation with Marilda. She had explained that obtaining the remains of the highest wind spirit would greatly accelerate his training. The remains had originally been buried by the great sage of Sylvania after completing her research, but Marilda was willing to hand them over. Still, she had attached a condition. Marilda confessed that her recent sadness had led her to think carefully about something. She then pointed out what had become obvious to her long ago. Janica was deeply in love with Ed. Because of that, she decided on a request for him. Before the vacation ended, he needed to kiss Janica at least once. As those memories resurfaced, Ed stared nervously at Janica's lips. Embarrassed, he slowly raised his hand and gently touched her cheek. The air between them became warm, romantic, and intensely emotional as the distance separating them quietly disappeared.